Welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Ebony Janice. I go by Ebony Janice, which means that you should call me Ebony Janice. And let me start by saying shout out to Chelsea VonChaz, who is the host of a podcast called The Practice of a Hoodoo Baptist. I think that's the title of the podcast. The Practice of a Hoodoo Baptist. Yes, hosted by Chelsea VonChaz. I was a guest on this podcast earlier this year, maybe late last year. I can't remember. What is time? It ain't black, I'll tell you that. And Hoodoo Baptist gave me language for life, for my actual life. And so shout out to her for that language. Hoodoo Baptist actually, however, is a practice that a lot of, I think, Black Christians in some way, shape, form, or fashion who have done some form of deconstruction and have a relationship with their actual spiritual technologies outside of a westernized Christian understanding of themselves would lean into. It is a naming that I feel like many of us could really claim. I will always cite Chelsea VonChaz as where I came to that language from, very similar to how I cite J.T. Perry for how I come to the language of like churchy mystic. I wouldn't necessarily call myself actually a Hoodoo Baptist or a churchy mystic, but I very much so align with the thought process around both of those ideas. And so I just want to talk a little bit about the fact about how in my life, myself and many people in my family, whether they have identified or not, have been practicing this idea of being a Hoodoo Baptist. And so basically, let me start by saying that being a Hoodoo Baptist, Hoodoo, growing up with the language of Hoodoo was actually always associated with voodoo. And it wasn't until I really started studying Black religion that I learned that Hoodoo and voodoo are very drastically different things. And in fact, the conflation of Hoodoo and voodoo is intentional. The idea is that because voodoo have been so well documented and demonized by Hollywood in particular, that it would be easy then to just kind of throw hoodoo in there with it. So there are a lot of people, particularly from the South, who conflate hoodoo and voodoo. And I grew up with them. I grew up with a grandmother from Alabama. I grew up with a dad from Meridian, Mississippi, and with family from Louisiana, family from Mississippi, family from Alabama, family from Georgia. And so for the most part, they would put those two together. Oh, you're doing voodoo or you're doing hoodoo. And they would say it as the same thing. And this idea then that hoodoo was this kind of demonic witchcraft religious practice that really is not what it is or what it was at all. The idea that voodoo is demonic is a lie, right? That white supremacy created, but that's not the topic of this conversation today. Today, we're talking about specifically the fact that hoodoo and voodoo are not the same at all. I think that they could be in some ways in relationship with each other, but they are not the same at all. Hoodoo is a spiritual tradition and technology and set of rituals and tools and routines and ideas and ideologies that Black people, particularly those who are the direct descendants of enslaved Africans, deeply held on to these ideas, and then began to form and merge and amalgamate and co-create their own ideas, their own rituals, their own set of beliefs about things that kept us safe, things that kept us whole, things that protected us, things that healed us because of what we had access to. So geography matters in this, particularly as Black descendants of enslaved Africans, and the time frame, all of these things matter into the cultivation of what it means to practice hoodoo or to be a hoodoo practitioner or to come from hoodoo people. Now, the hoodoo people were not all mystic and scary and woo-woo and weird and, doing a whole bunch of weird stuff. And I want to show you how. Because did you consider your grandma weird? Maybe you did, but largely you very likely didn't. Your grandma with her preserves, your grandma with her castor oil, cod liver oil to heal, your grandmother with her, with the root work that she did, and you feel afraid of root work, but the reality is your grandmother was doing root work, your grandmother with her scriptures for everything, your grandmother with her altar in her house. It might have been a dresser, it might have been a table, things that you could not touch. It had obituaries on it, or it had memorabilia on it. It may have even had the first lock of hair from the little boy's first haircut in the Bible. It had like little notes written inside certain spaces. It had the Psalms, it had the Proverbs, it had all of these things, these ideas, and you never thought that that was weird. You just knew that that was grandma, that was big mama, that was Madea. And there wasn't anything wrong or demonic about it, because in fact she always in some way, or usually in some way, had some Christian language that was surrounding it. And so the language of Hoodoo Baptist is so profound for me because I grew up in the Baptist tradition, but I also grew up with all these technologies. I also grew up with all this language. I also grew up with, like the first person to enter the house had to be in the new year, had to be a man. I also grew up in a tradition that did a watch night for the new year to come in. I also grew up with black eyed peas and greens on the first of the year. I also grew up burning cinnamon. I also grew up with all these ideas and never thought or felt like they were demonic, because they were not demonic. They were Black. There's so many more hoodoo practitioners that are out there in the world. So this isn't a lesson on what hoodoo is. This is me just talking about the fact that it wasn't until I really fully deconstructed and really got deeper into my journey that I was able to embrace African spiritualities and technologies, particularly those by my direct descendants. I did not have to go to another continent, even though I am initiated into a West African tradition, into a Nigerian from the Yoruba people. Ifa is that, right? Like, so I am initiated Ifa, initiated Orisha priest from this particular West African tradition, because of that is just where my path took me. But I didn't need to go to another continent to be able to connect to my African traditional religion, to African spirituality, to technologies that were decidedly Black and spiritual, and not necessarily directly from the Bible, even though the Bible is very often in a lot of hoodoo practices for Black people. Or I'm saying for Black people, hoodoo is for Black people. And from Black people, of Black people, for Black people. Period. Discriminatorily. Like, not up for debate. Hoodoo belongs to us. And but I wanted to share this video because I think sometimes we need to think about some of the practices that we grew up with and to really just talk about it a little bit more, to demystify it. That is what feels very important to me. I realized that a major part of becoming actual Ebony Janice is healing my internalized anti-Blackness and healing the stories that I may have grown up with that led me to believe that X about me was wrong and that I need to undo that, or I need to get rid of that, when if I were to get rid of that, I would have to get rid of a portion of my whole personality as a Black person. And it is not possible for me to not, even as an initiated Ifa priest, because I am the granddaughter. Sorry for anybody to feel some kind of way about this, but because I am the granddaughter in both directions of hoodoo people, it's impossible for me to actually, because my direct descendants had some practice of Baptist hoodoo traditions, had some practice of it, an amalgamation of using Christianity both for their spiritual and eternal cultivation, and also for the actual every single day working of how do we survive and thrive in these times as Black people in these bodies. It's not possible for me to exclude those things either. So I am all those things. I am an initiated Ifa priest, but I'm also direct lineage of Hoodoo Baptist people. Tell me in the comment section, have you ever really thought about the practices that you grew up with that were decidedly Black? And what does it mean for you, either in your own deconstruction journey or possibly towards your deconstruction journey, that your grandmother with her super sane self was not just practicing Westernized Christianity,